May I have your attention, please? It is my distinct honor and pleasure on behalf of St. Thomas University and President Monsignor Casal to welcome you to this special edition of our Distinguished Speaker Series. We are very fortunate to have someone today who obviously is known throughout the country for her dedication to public service. And it was my honor to have been able to work for Miss Rino. In fact, I began my legal career, and I won't say when, it's been a while, when I was hired by Miss Rino in the State Attorney's Office. And before I go into the formal introduction, I want to tell you the personal story that led to my joining the State Attorney's Office back then that will give you a sense of what kind of dedicated public servant Miss Rino is. I had a job offer from the State Attorney's Office in Duval County. Ed Austin was the state attorney at the time. But I really wanted to join the Miami State Attorney's Office because I wanted litigation experience, and I knew that I would not get the type of litigation experience in Duval County in Jacksonville that I would in Miami. And I had just gotten my bar results, and fortunately I had passed on my first try, and I was ready to go. And I was waiting for the offer from the State Attorney's Office, so I needed to contact them to see if there was a potential that they would hire me so that I could take that position instead of the position as an assistant state attorney in Duval County. I couldn't sleep that night, and I woke up very early, and I got up the phone. I said, I can't wait anymore. And at 7:30 in the morning, I dialed the State Attorney's Office. And you know who answered the phone to my astonishment? Miss Rino did. Because she was there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she answered her own phone, and she listed her number in the white pages. And I said, hello, who am I speaking to? She said, this is Janet Rino. And I went, oh, how can I help you? And I said, well, listen, I'm in this quandary because, you know, I want to join your office, and I've got an outstanding offer from Duval County, but I'd really like to join your office, but I don't have a formal offer. And she said, well, my chief assistant, George Joss, is going to come in a little bit later, and he'll call you. And I was called, and I went in at 9 o'clock. I was ushered into her office at 9:15. And she made me the offer to join the State Attorney's Office at the time, and it was a wonderful experience that I cherish. While I'm at it, there are quite a few of her assistants here who worked with her and under her that I want to acknowledge, including our own Professor Tony Musto in the legal writing department, Abe Laser, David Waxman, Margie Henghold, who started together with me, and of course, the one and only Benton Becker there in the front row, who we worked together with back in 1982. So it's really great and a pleasure to be able to introduce her here. You can't do justice to her accomplishments, but I'll try to hit a few highlights. Of course, she was the first woman to serve as United States Attorney General and served for 8 years, held that office longer than any other United States Attorney General since before the Civil War. She was, of course, a state attorney here in Dade County prior to being the Attorney General of the United States for 15 years. She was also the staff director of the Judiciary Committee for the Florida House of Representatives, where she was instrumental in working on the Florida State Constitution and its amendment She was counsel for the State Committee for Revising the Florida Criminal Code. She was an innovative public servant. In fact, she established the Miami Drug Court, which provides alternative treatment for nonviolent offenders who have drug abuse problems, and which has been used as a model throughout the nation in her tenure here as state attorney. She helped reform the juvenile justice system and actively pursued delinquent parents for child support during her tenure as state attorney here in Dade County. While she was Attorney General, she helped then President Clinton win approval of a 1994 crime bill, which, among other things, authorized the funding of social programs, the hiring of an additional 1,000 police officers nationwide, the building of new prisons, and she increased protections afforded to women and children under that legislation under the Violence Against Women Act of 1994. I think what sums up her dedication to public service among the many awards that she has received is in 2003, she received the Distinguished Stennis Center Lindy Boggs Award for demonstrating the ideals of patriotism, courage, integrity, and leadership in public service. To me, that sums it up. And so, without further ado, I present to you the Honorable Janet Rino, who will address you on lawyers as problem solvers.
Thank you so much, Dean. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be here today to look out and see people who I worked with, who put hours and hours and hours into public service over the years, who have done so much to make this world a better world, and it's just great to see you guys. You look back on your life, and particularly a life of public service, and you see the people who have made a difference. And I want to talk to the students today to let you know that there are opportunities that each of you can have in the course of your legal profession to make a difference and to make this world a better place. I'd like to give you an example. When I took office, Dr. Joe Davis, our medical examiner, who is a wonderful person, now retired in Tallahassee, said, "Janet, why don't you have somebody come over here and see why people got killed in Dade County in the last 20 years, and then fashion something that can make a difference?" We got an intern to go over, went to the medical examiner's office, looked at the files, went through them in detail over the past 20 years, and found that 40% of the cases in the medical examiner's office related to domestic violence. Tom Peterson drafted a grant application for a domestic violence intervention program, and we got that. People looked at us and said, "What are you doing? What is the state attorney's office involved in pursuing domestic violence in this fashion? Why are you intervening?" And I said, "The kid who watches his father beat his mother is going to come to accept violence as a way of life. And if we are going to be true problem solvers, if we're going to make a difference, we've got to start where it starts and prevent it where it starts if we are going to make a difference in the long run." We carefully built the office. Then the state said, this is not something that the LAAA grant ran out, and so we had to figure new funding, and the state said, "We won't take it over because that's not what prosecutors do." And I got the county to take it over, and there's still vestiges of that program in place in Dade County. But as Margie Hinghold can tell you, the hours that go into it, the patience that is required, the tenacity that is required is extraordinary, but it pays off. It took me a long time to realize that it paid off. I went to Washington. I was responsible for the implementation of the VAWA grants, the Violence Against Women grants. I saw more prosecutors and more police officers involved and trained in domestic violence and how to handle it. I saw offices established in police departments. But I didn't see any impact in terms of crime itself. Crime generally was starting down across the country, and I watched it go down in a very gratifying way. But I didn't see domestic violence affected. But just recently, the Bureau of Justice Statistics from the Department of Justice has issued a report pointing out that there has been over a 50% drop in domestic violence between 1993, when we took office, and the year 2004, when the grant ended. It is, to me, one of the most encouraging signs I see, because I think we can take that model and, in the atmosphere we have today, use it in other areas to make a difference. Let me tell you what I have in mind. We now have prosecutors who have a mixed caseload. In some instances, they're not defined as the type of case that they take. But what if we did the same thing with respect to other efforts? Community building, police initiatives. The International Association of Chiefs of Police has just welcomed a new director, new president of the IACP. And he has written a long article challenging all the members of the IACP to become innovative in crime fighting. They saw it worked in the 90s and the succeeding years. They saw what it did. We now have police who are saying we can do this with the social program that made a difference, that reduced crime in our community. What people have told me is that it's so difficult to figure out how you're going to do something that can make a difference. When Kathy Rundle muttered to me about a drug court that's focused on drug courts and drug problems, I said, why don't we do something about it? And so I challenge all of you who are involved to say, what am I doing? And what can I do, not just in my daily job, but in the long run, to take these cases we have, take the data that we have, take the individuals that we have working on this, and prevent the problem before it becomes too huge. And then something happened. My dear friend Bob Butterworth gets appointed head of DCF, and we have a golden opportunity. Bob Butterworth used to spend time with me telling me what should go into the Florida Code, criminal code. This was before he took over every office in the state, practically. We can challenge Bob Butterworth, after he gets control of DCF, to start talking about the longer range issue. And one of the most important lessons I learned as state attorney, during the height of the crack epidemic, which hit Miami in 1984, earlier than in most places in the nation, the doctors at Jackson Memorial Hospital invited me to come over and spend an afternoon with them. They showed me the crack babies who were stacked up, not changed or talked or held. Nobody talked to them or held them except when they were changed and fed. They were not beginning to react with human emotion, whereas the child across the room, who was born with birth defects unassociated with crack, was beginning to respond to her parents, who were with her almost as much as possible around the clock. The doctors that afternoon taught me that 50% of all learned human response is learned in the first year of life, that the concept of reward and punishment and a conscience is developed in the first 3 years of life. And I said to myself as I drove back to the state attorney's office that afternoon, what good are all the prisons in America going to be unless we have the child with an opportunity to get off on the right foot? Why can't we take St. Thomas and all its resources and figure out how we do this, how we focus and become part of a system that gives parental support in the early years, which makes such a difference in 0 to 3. We should have an opportunity for every child to have supportive programs that fill the need that an absent parent creates. We should have child support programs that let that mother know that she can collect child support. And then you start talking about it and figure out what you can do. And I decided to take over the state attorney's office responsibility for child support collection in the office. That is probably one of the most thankless jobs that you could ever want to have. I know, because I got the calls early on Saturday morning saying, what am I going to do if I don't get my check? I haven't gotten my check and it's all your fault. And the next morning they would call me and say, I'm sorry I cussed at you. I got my check in the mail and I appreciate it so much. I can walk down, it's not a boast, it's just a gratifying feeling. I can walk down the length of the Martin Luther King parade and get cheered because of child support. And people stop me and say, you got my mother, child support, and it has made all the difference. You can do so much as lawyers if you look beyond the immediate task and say, how can we create a situation that addresses the problems that we're focused on and punish? We can address those better by trying to prevent them from happening in the first place. The drug court was another example. And we can go further in the drug court if we could only persuade people that the drug court could be very effective for people who deserve some prison time, but don't deserve some of the draconian sentences that exist with respect to drugs in the federal system. And so when I came to Washington, I found that I was in an unusual situation. I had more power than I'd had before. I had lawyers who had stayed in this same position rather than seeing a turnover again and again. This was an exciting opportunity, and I had a federal system where I had federal agents who used to come to town and say, we want this, 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 and this from your office, but we're not going to give you the same thing in return. I could see a two-way street, the opportunity to create a two-way street between federal agents and federal prosecutors, and Judge Marcus was wonderful in terms of giving me the opportunity to really make principles of federalism apply in this county. I could turn around and authorize the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut to proceed in a partnership with the state attorney in Connecticut, going after an organized criminal gang, and watch the crime rate go down 35% in 1 year. I saw things that were possible to really reduce crime, but there were other issues coming up as well, and one that we're going to have to be absolutely cognizant of if we're going to make a difference. We're watching America grow old before our eyes. The far greater percentage of the people in this country are over 65 than was the case 10 years ago. And the forecasts for an increased life expectancy are tremendous, really provide for some cause for concern, because we're going to have fewer people who are under 65 supporting the elderly who are over 65. When I ran for governor, I visited a number of adult living facilities in the state, and it was amazing to walk in and find out how many people in the facility were over 100 years old. Being over 100 was not that strange a phenomenon. And some of them were going quite strong. They were going to be around for a long time to come. But unless we address the care of our elderly in a straightforward, knowing way, we're going to have a crisis on our hands that makes much of our crime problems seem de minimis. How we care for our elderly, how we investigate the needs of our elderly are a critical portion of the problem that we're going to have to address if we want the crime rate to come down. And so what I see the opportunity to do now is to take the data that we have and build on it and make sure that we have a chronology of effort that makes a difference. Let us say that all children in Florida will have an intervention program that gives them an opportunity to bond with the parent if that's possible. But if it's not possible, there should be termination of parental rights, and the people should have the opportunity for good parenting in an effective way. But we've got to be honest with ourselves and measure ourselves. When we developed the Domestic Violence Intervention Grant, we were honest with ourselves in terms of what we were doing and what we weren't. When we failed to meet a goal, we acknowledged that, and we tried to learn from that. I wish I had the opportunity to be back in Washington and take the data that we had and learn from that and learn what we could do to more effectively supervise the grant and more effectively implement the grant across the country. But we can watch from the sidelines nonetheless and make a difference. The mayors and chief executive officers of the counties of the country came together, and they asked for one program that has been in effect now for some time. It's a reentry program where the community makes a grant application for a reentry program that gives the young person a chance to come back to the community with some chance of success, with a job opportunity, with continuing supervision for drug treatment. What we have got to do is take our sentencing process, which is now undergoing considerable review by the Supreme Court, and understand what is needed. How long a sentence should somebody serve who's a first offender, who's been dealing in drugs? Does it depend on the amount? When do we say they can come back to the community? It's far better that they come back with somebody available to them if they need help to resist the temptations through 24-hour hotlines and drop-in services. But we can do a better job of treating them in the community if we hold out the carrot and stick approach and let them know that this reentry program is conditioned on them behaving in prison and meeting the standards of prison while they're there. But it makes far better sense to treat them in prison rather than wait till they get out without any supervision, without any reentry support, without any job opportunity, they're going to be right back where they started. We've got to do more in terms of job opportunities and job training. We have a massive workforce in our prisons that are a burden on society. They can be converted to a positive force in many instances by addressing the issue of the Pell Grants, which eliminated training for people in prison, which doesn't make any sense if we really think they're going to be able to compete on the outside. And we need to make sure that we have an educational system that meets the needs of all our young people. The number of people who drop out continues at an alarming rate. They're going to drop out and either develop an attitude that really, it speaks so much of what we have missed in terms of contributing to these young people's lives. We have got to develop ways to focus on 11, 12, 13-year-olds who have continued to get into trouble, who have a large number of arrests, who have no one to go home to except a grandmother who cannot cope with the child and cannot control the child. If we're going to prevent crime, we've got to continue to prevent it by intervening at an earlier date. And as we see the child progress in the chronology from 0 to 3 to kindergarten through third grade through ninth grade, we have got to make sure that we provide that child an education that can give them a skill that will enable them to earn a living wage. And if we don't do that, we're going to have a state that does not have a workforce properly trained, that does not have people prepared to fill jobs that are necessary to sustain the state's economy. And we're going to have a state more dangerous. Again, the president of the IACP, in his article challenging his membership, pointed out that we have got to have school-based programs, community-based programs, special initiatives that are focused on the crime problems in each community. And he doesn't leave out the rural communities. He's talking about all of them. But again, we can make a difference. I don't know what's been done. I have the luxury of standing up here and not being accountable to anybody except myself. And it is extraordinary to think that we could make a difference, but as we see a ninth grader drop out and become bored with school, we should have an ability to establish a reentry court that says, look, you can work with us, you can get job training and placement while in prison, you can get drug treatment, because you're going to need all that to stay drug-free and to stay crime-free when you get out. You've got people here who have a 24-hour hotline for you when you need it. You can gradually reintegrate into the community. But you're going to have to do it and be responsible to the judge. That program could work, and you could combine that with a joint charge, a double charge in juvenile of a felony charge and a charge that would give him the opportunity to, the judge and the criminal division to decide the case, but retain jurisdiction of one of the counts in juvenile so that the juvenile judge can dispose of the case, and then use it in a coherent, cohesive way to design a program that can enable that child to live on a level playing field. Too often we see a child sent to the adult court because there is no one that cares about him at home, or there's a grandmother who has struggled to help him and is not doing well. You can look at the system, and what gives me such great pleasure is that for so long now, I had to hope that results would show that we've made a difference. Now we've seen these results. The crime is starting back up. Because of 9/11, monies were not spent in local crime fighting. The problems are starting back up because that child born 15 years ago who had support, who had somebody that cared, now has had to drift and fend for himself again and again. Time is running out, but we have enough data and enough know-how from what we have been able to do so far in this country to show what effect you can have on crime if you use the power of the law with the results that scientists and physicians have developed with respect to drug treatment, violence prevention, and the like. If we can use a public health model to address the issue of crime, we can go a long way towards achieving our goal. But there are other goals that we have got to achieve. We have got to make the criminal justice system fair for all people. And we have got to make sure that we have charging procedures in place that provide for justice for all who come before the courts. I used to lie awake in bed at night thinking, have I charged an innocent person? And I did. It is an awesome feeling, and one that requires that you rededicate yourself to trying to do your best to make sure that you have not done that, and that your office has not been responsible for that. We have learned so much through post-conviction DNA testing of cases in which people have been exonerated or charges dropped against them because of the findings of DNA. But there are thousands of cases out there with people claiming their innocence who still have not had their cases resolved. And we must use our problem-solving skills to address those cases and to make sure that we leave no one's claim ignored as we learn from the exonerations themselves. There are now over 190 people who have been exonerated just through the Innocence Project's cases. That does not include Northwestern's law school's findings on innocence. If we take the information that shows that most of these exonerations occurred because of faulty eyewitness identification, because of a forced confession, forced only because he wasn't hit, he was just told that he had done it, and he'd get off and do a lot less time if he cooperated with them. We have seen people wrongfully convicted because of jailhouse snitches who wanted to get out at any cost, because of a lab personnel who didn't want to dot the I's and cross the T's and was just lazy. We have seen prosecutors who didn't do their job, and we have seen defense attorneys who didn't do their job. We should not lambaste them. We should work with them to make sure that we have procedures in place that ensure that only the innocent get prosecuted and that the guilty get convicted according to principles of due process and fair play. I will never forget, for as long as I live, standing in a courthouse in DeSoto County, Florida, before a judge on the James Richardson case. Mr. Richardson sat as close to me as you are in the courtroom. And we had been appointed the acting state attorney, but we gave the state attorney who had handled the case the opportunity to make his point as well. We argued the case into the afternoon, and then the court ruled with us, and I watched Mr. Richardson walk out of the courtroom and out of the courthouse a free man for the first time in 22 years. So the thought that people have served time when they did not deserve it is an awesome thought. And we as lawyers must use the best tools we have to get to the bottom of it and to learn from the post-conviction exonerations why these things happen and what we can do to prevent them. I have always loved the law. My mother forbid me to go to law school because she didn't think much of lawyers after having worked in my grandfather's office when he was ill. But I had gone to work with my father, who was a newspaper reporter, and I could sit up in the front of the courtroom and watch everything that went on. And it was like having a seat right at the front of the whole program. I saw then, when a judge that cared, what a judge could do by innovative and creative sentencing. I saw what a police officer could do by the exercise of his tone of voice and his manner with a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 12-year-old that gave him an opportunity to inspire and create trust. When the president of the IACP is speaking out, as he has in this recent article, when prosecutors have such a wonderful opportunity to learn from post-conviction DNA testing when it is appropriate. When we see that programs can work like the domestic violence program has worked and that it can make a difference across the country, then we should all be about saying, yes, I'm coming out of law school and I'm going to pursue this path in the law that has always interested me. But I am going to use the law to be a problem solver and to prevent the problems from happening before we ever get them to court. Lawyers have a rare opportunity to pursue this line, to make the effort and make a profound difference in the lives of this nation. We can also say that the crime rates that we have tolerated in this nation don't have to be. That if lawyers use their skills, if they reach out and form partnerships with others, we can truly, truly, truly reduce crime to new low levels and join other nations in the world in making sense of a criminal justice system that has been so burdened over time. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions? Because Ms. Reno's graciously agreed to answer some questions you may have.
Questions?
First, I'd like to say it's an absolute pleasure to hear you speak, Matt. I just have a quick question regarding the young children that you mentioned, who the 11, 12, 13-year-olds. In some of the reading I've done, I've come across a rather unsettling notion that these children actually tend to exhibit criminal behavior because they do not wish to become a part of the community, they do not wish to become outstanding members of society. Not necessarily because they had bad parents or they weren't accepted at school, but because they find excitement and adventure in these other pursuits. And I was wondering maybe if you have any idea how we can deal with those views.
You can deal with those views by identifying that child early on. Even probably he will evidence his particular talents in 0 to 3 itself. And identify him as he's coming up. He's not going to become that person overnight. He's going to grow up to become that person. Intervene and find out that when he was in the 9th grade and had all these wonderful ideas and wanted to study something, that he got bored with it because the teacher didn't have the skills to really create an interesting life for him, so he dropped out of that positive light. If we could, one of the best scenes I can use to describe what a difference you can make is I went to a vocational school to talk about what could be done through vocational training during my campaign for governor. And a woman was there who said she was the head of the PTA and her son was a student in the school. She said, my son is in this school because a year ago he was dropping out. He was falling asleep in class. He was bored out of his mind. He was on his way to trouble. I got him into this vocational school that was run by the county school system. He came in as a chef. He wanted to learn how to be a chef, and he, after 2 years, had done very well. He had learned how to present and the finances of cooking, the nutritional issues, the dietary issues, the presentation issues. He had it all down pat. And he says, and now what I want to do is be a doctor. Give them those opportunities so you don't have to wait till they get into real trouble at 10, 11, and 12, and then into terrible trouble when they're 18, and then when you have to read the application for the death penalty and see one child live and one child die because of the failure to intervene. You say, let's figure out how we do this to avoid it. I think meth is one of the most difficult substances to deal with and difficult problems to deal with that I know of. Fortunately, we have not seen as much of it here as on the West Coast and in the Plains States area. But what I would like to see done is have a central place where we can analyze these substances, where we can use science along with the law, so we as lawyers are not guessing about what works and what doesn't work, and have the scientists tell us what is so different about meth. Have the physicians tell us what is the best treatment that we can provide, and that we do it in an informed way that realizes that is based on the fact that we have seen enough evidence now that if we use common sense and follow through in prevention, we're going to make a lot of difference down the road and do something about meth. But meth has been a really intractable substance from the stories I hear from prosecutors and police officers across the country. The biggest challenge as Attorney General in this specific issue was Waco, and trying to figure out what the right thing to do was, and then trying to take responsibility for it and work through the issues. And the day the jury came back with no findings against the government was a wonderful day. But there again, the American people want to be addressed. They want you to be as candid as you can. And it was so touching to have so many people come up to me and they would pat me on the shoulder and say, "You did good." I obviously didn't do good. The tragedies of the deaths of the people, particularly the children, was something that will live with me all of my life. But people support you and care, and you speak out candidly.
What are your thoughts about the decriminalization some or all of
I am influenced by the successes. I have not seen overall statistics because the drug courts differ from court to court. But I've seen enough statistics that indicate that they're working, and people feel that they're working to believe that they are. And that's based on a carrot and stick approach, and having that stick is a very effective tool. I would like, again, for us to take the best evidence we have from the drug courts and understand what we can do. My general hunch is that if we have somebody that has a 3-year prison sentence, drug treatment would be, it would make great sense to develop a program that provided an initial effort in the prison and then one outside the prison to give the person a chance to come back with a chance of success. But before I saw the decriminalization occur, I would like to know what the findings are from the drug courts. Yes.
General, first let me say what a pleasure it is to finally have you here at St. Thomas also. In your comments, it's very clear that you're focusing on certain types of crimes. And one of the main elements of our criminal justice system is retribution. But for certain crimes, like for crimes by juveniles, drug crimes, minor drug crimes, burglaries, things like this, Australia and the UK have looked at restorative justice, where the community takes some responsibility for the child itself, the child who hasn't had the kind of support and nurturing, and ends up involved in drugs because he stands on the street corner after school all day and sees that the drug dealers are making the money. And I'm wondering, maybe short of decriminalization, whether we ought to take a look at, with regard to certain categories of crimes, this concept of restorative justice and eliminating this element, or at least eroding it, of retribution, which seems to be so important in our criminal justice system.
If somebody to develop a program like that, you have got to do it across the board so that somebody understands what you're trying to do. The victim, again, what would be fascinating is if prosecutors of the national District Attorneys Association used its facilities to look at what works and doesn't work in terms of victim participation. Maybe a system of restorative justice with the victim participating can make a difference. Let us find out and let us use it to the best of our abilities, because what we did with the drug court is had outside experts come in and evaluate us. We were very careful to make sure that we were as candid as possible, and it didn't keep people from, initially, it didn't keep people from using drugs or buying drugs. But what it did do was increase the time between recidivism, and you could measure that to see real effect. Let us learn and let us take the data and formulate policies that presume that these ideas will work, and let's see what can be done to make them work.
Picking up on your words of learning and the subject that you touched on before, of the people that are innocently convicted, what are we doing as a nation, as a justice system, to try to mine the information as to what is going wrong, and then change the laws, change the procedures, change whatever needs to be changed, so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes?
We formed the American Judicature Society, of which I serve on the board of directors, formed a Institute of Forensic Science and Public Policy to address just this issue and to work with groups such as the Innocence Project and John Jay College's Center for Forensic Policy. And that's exactly what we're doing now, trying to take the data and understand what can be done, what caused it. The Innocence Project has, there's a good website, innocenceproject.org, that will give you a list of people and the causes and the remedies for the various issues that the jailhouse snitch who wrongfully accused somebody, the person who doesn't do the lab work correctly. We have other issues too. Some of the science we saw that was supposedly forensic science is not science, it's some good ideas. In some instances, it's not even good ideas, it's bad junk science. We've got to learn from those cases as well. And the Institute is centered in Greensboro, North Carolina, and is trying to develop the capacity, develop the funding that will permit it to do this.
You've been such a role model for women everywhere. What challenges did you face on Capitol Hill as a woman, and do you think America is ready for Hillary?
Yes, the America is ready for Hillary. The challenge is, my sister has a theory that the Congress will pick on women more than men, and that Dan Burton and others who grilled me in congressional hearings did so in the fashion that they did because I was a woman. I never felt that way. Arlen Specter sneered at fellow senators just as he sneered at me. And I don't think there was any difference or treated any differently. Yes.
Hey, General Rino, it's a pleasure that you're here. It's just an honor to hear you speak and for you to convey your experiences. My question for you is, like, for example, in Florida,
I am personally opposed to capital punishment, and but I asked for it. After watching the results of the Innocence Project to date, I could not ask for it now. The risk, anybody that looks at the data that the Innocence Project has been able to develop would have to have a reasonable doubt about most every case. Or a reasonable doubt doesn't mean what it says. To level the playing field is a critical issue if we're going to continue to have the death penalty. That 10, 11, and 12-year-old who are just on the verge of getting in trouble. I would have to read in the death penalty applications, and I had to sign every death penalty application as Attorney General that the federal government filed. I would read, and I could just tell about the time the kid was going to get in trouble in the pre-sentence narrative, and that it was going to get in worse trouble because there was nobody at home to take care of him, to be his advocate, and that he was going to be in worse trouble because he was transferred as a relatively young kid into an adult facility that provided no support, no protection. I think the best thing to do is to abolish the death penalty. I haven't been involved in the day-to-day operation of the state attorney's office in a long time, so I'm not that familiar with the issues. Based just what I read in the papers, I think the juvenile justice system is sadly lacking in facilities. It always has lacked proper funding for programs to make a difference in a child's life and to change a child's life. But it's not just money. That's the reason I come back to a court that would focus on 10, 11, and 12-year-olds when we need to level the playing field. Too often, I remember one case in which there were two offenders. One had a strong family structure at home, and they were down at the police station in a New York Minute trying to work with police to get the boy home. The other kid who committed the same crime had a grandmother taking care of him, and she couldn't cope, and she was too infirm to come to the police station. We've got to focus on those children, and if we don't do something earlier than that time of 10, 11, and 12, we're going to be in the same bad trouble, because the longer we wait to take really affirmative action in the kid's life, the more we're going to have to spend because of our failure to do that. So, from the description I've heard, the juvenile, I hope that the new governor's appointment will be someone, I understand he's the police chief of Tallahassee, and I hope that he has the administrative capabilities and experience that will enable him to build a department that is strong and vigorous and capable of taking action.
Would you tell us the story about your mother's house?
When I was 8 years old, my mother, we lived in a little wooden house at the corner of 112th Avenue and North Kendall Drive. We didn't have enough money to build a bigger house, and with 4 children, we were outgrowing the house. One afternoon, my mother announced that she was going to build the house. And we said, "What do you know about building a house?" And she said, "I'm going to learn." And she went to the brick mason, the electrician, and the plumber, and she asked them, "How do you build a house?" And she came home and dug the foundation with her own hands with a pick and shovel. She laid the blocks, she put in the wiring and the plumbing, and my father helped her with the heavy stuff when he came home from work at night. She and I lived in that house until she died just before I went to Washington, and that house was a symbol to me that you can do anything you really want to if it's the right thing to do and you put your mind to it. It taught me another lesson after Hurricane Andrew. She and I were by ourselves in the house, and the wind reached an ungodly howl, and she got out of bed, came in, sat down in her chair, folded her hands, and she was totally unafraid, for she knew how she had built that house. She had not cut corners. She'd not cut corners. She'd put in the right materials, and she built it the right way. When we went out the next morning, the world looked like a World War I battlefield, but the house had only lost 1 shingle and some screens.
And I may say that I had the privilege of being in that house when I was an assistant state attorney, and Ms. Rino graciously hosted our new us there. And I think it's also a testament to her ideas and her commitment that we have 2 of her former assistants who are directly working on children's rights issues. March Henghold, who is working strictly on the Jimmy Rice legislation cases. And since I failed to recognize her, she just came down, Mary Cagle, who's working no longer in the state attorney's office with Charlie. And that is a testament to the inspiration that Ms. Rino gives to those who work with her. And now it's my pleasure to present her a plaque, and the President will address you after this presentation as well. I wish to present you this plaque in recognition of your dedicated service. It reads, St. Thomas University School of Law recognizes Janet Rino for outstanding contributions to the development of law and legal scholarship and to the pursuit of justice. 2006-2007 Distinguished Speaker Series, St. Thomas University School of Law, Miami Gardens, Florida. Thank you very much.
I certainly would like to thank Janet Rino for coming today to address us and for giving us both an institutional challenge and individual challenges. Janet, I might say that you might suspect that we're rather fond of former attorneys general around here. And it's always good to have another one up at this podium. I'd also like to thank you for 2 other reasons. I'd like to thank you for your life of public service. It's not easy to do the jobs that you did do, and I think it's important for you to know that institutions like ours and individuals like ourselves thank you for giving your life to public service. And secondly, I'd like to thank you for creating a model for our students to go into public service. We're very proud of the number of students of St. Thomas University that do go into public service. You've been a model of integrity and also of creativity. God bless you, and thank you.